All right. All right. It's nice to see everybody. Many of you I've met before. It's great to see new faces as well. Um, I am a PhD student entering my second year at Johns Hopkins University in the Cook Lab at the Center for Functional Anatomy and Evolution. Most of the time, we're doing anatomy, teaching human anatomy to medical students and things like that. But a lot of the faculty there on their own do a lot of work with past life and paleontology and such. So today, let's see, does it work? That's okay. We'll do it from here. There. We're going to be talking about about Megalodon mostly, but there was some news, so I did want to share it, talk about it a little bit. I actually mostly study primate fossils, and I was interested in human evolution for a long time. So some really cool human evolutionary news came out recently about this fossil from this large cranium here. Homo longi is what has been named from Harbin in China, was recently sequenced its mitochondrial DNA and the proteins in its teeth and its dental plaque. And it was discovered that it belonged to an ancient lineage known as Denisovans, a lineage which was discovered around 10-ish years ago when they were trying to sequence Neanderthals for the first time. They were just scanning a bunch of little bits and bobs from a cave in Siberia, these Denisova 2, 3, 4, and 8. And they found that these were actually a completely different species we knew nothing about, we had no bones for. Over time, we've now been testing a lot of the bones from particularly Asia, and we now have added several bones to the collection, including these two mandibles, one of which is from waters off Taiwan. The other is from Tibet, from the Tibetan mountains. And so it's really cool to finally put a face on this creature. It seems that there may be a kind of two, it may actually refer to two species. So Denisovans may be two species, one of which is Homo longi. The other one may be a group that seems to have lived a little bit longer. We know that many modern humans have genetic input from this species, as well as from Neanderthals. So it's really cool to see our relatives. Here's some other fossils from around the same time found in Asia. So Homo longi is up there. So that seems to come from like this older group of Denisovans. The younger group may include some of these things. We've confirmed those two mandibles based on molecular stuff, but the other stuff might fit in. It's been named Homo juluensis, which are called the Julurans, which is big-headed in Chinese. So it's a large-headed creature in Mandarin Chinese. Homo longi means dragon man, so that's kind of a cool name. Along with two hobbit species, so two small dwarf island human species, Homo luzonensis from the Philippines and Homo floresiensis from Indonesia. That's not what you came here to learn about, but it's kind of cool. So we're going to talk about Megalodon today, not this Megalodon, which is a clam from the Mesozoic of Europe, which happens to actually have the name capital M Megalodon. So, Homo sapiens, you have Homo and then the sapiens. This would be like the Homo part, the genus part. We're here to talk about Megalodon. Megalodon is, as you all probably know, an extremely large shark that lived during the Miocene, some maybe 15 to roundish 3.5 million years ago to the Pliocene there. And Megalodon seems to have gotten to around 50 feet, although a recent reconstruction here upped it up to maybe potentially up to 70, 80 feet, finding through a different method than had been used previously that they may have been more shaped like a lemon shark, strangely enough, been a lot longer. But this is an ongoing conjecture about it. Things that we all know about Megalodon probably is that they eat whales, which makes sense. They're giant predators, not much else in the ocean that's that size. And we have abundant evidence for this. We have bones from the Calvert Cliffs here in Maryland. A bunch of them show shark teeth marks that could only be from Megalodon due to the size and the serrations. We even have vertebra from Venezuela, which has a Megalodon tooth stuck in it. We have a few examples like this rib from South Carolina in the bottom left, which shows signs of healing. So we know that at least in some circumstances, it was an active predator. We don't know if it was probably also scavenging as well, as most ocean predators do. And we also know that it ate seals, but potentially also sea cows, some possible examples of that. And we now have direct evidence from isotopes from the teeth. Isotopes, we can use zinc isotopes in particular to find marine predators, their trophic level, so how high up they are in the food chain. As we might expect, Megalodon is extremely high up on the food chain. It's for some reason, the megalodon from Japan specifically at an extremely high trophic level, as well as Chobutensis, a species where we're going to talk about in a little bit, Carcarcles chobutensis, often called chubs. And they are overlap a lot with great white sharks and the ancestors of great white sharks. You also know from isotopes, from different isotopes, oxygen isotopes mostly, that the temperature at which their teeth formed at was above the temperature of the water they were in. So it seems that they were endothermic or warm-blooded, at least in part of its body. This is something that modern great white sharks do and some of their relatives through a system of arterial supply that goes from organs which produce heat and bring it to other parts of the body. And Megalodon seems to have even higher than great white shark is proportionally, almost to the point of whale endothermy, so almost like a mammal. And that probably allowed it to go into some cooler waters. This is a map showing the distribution of Megalodon finds throughout the world. Recently, we've added Canada up there to the mix. So it's, as it seems, it's in waters that are projected to have been a little bit above freezing. So that's probably where I went to, although there's probably some sampling bias because I don't know many people in Antarctica who are looking for Megalodon teeth. But,
yeah. Go back one slide.
Yeah, of course.
Because, I mean, those are locations where the teeth were found.
Yes.
But does that take into account essentially the temperature when that shark was alive?
Yes, this is I believe this is a projection from of projected temperatures during the Miocene, which there's a lot of assumptions that roll up into that. But they are this is the believed average yearly temperature.
Gotcha.
Yeah, but as you can see, there are at least a few examples that go past that line. So, but we also know from some isotopes that they were generally probably around this temperature. Like if that is the general range of the temperatures they could get to, at least on the samples that have been tested so far. Yeah, and you see there were, there's some in Central Asia and things. Some of those may be false records, but there was also a Tethys seaway that was retreating at that time. So let's talk a little about meganatomy. I know most of you know a lot about meganatomy probably already so far, but just for anyone who doesn't, Megalodon, like other sharks, is weakly heterodont. So it has different teeth at different positions in its mouth. Not super different teeth, but basically as you go to the corners of the mouth, they get smaller. They direct more towards the corner of the mouth. They get wider proportionally. You have anteriors, laterals, and posteriors in Megalodon, as well as occasionally symphysial teeth. Symphysial teeth are teeth from the centers of the mouth, both bottom and top. There was a debate for a while whether Megalodon had these. We found enough of them where I think we can say that they're probably something they commonly had. They're often very strangely shaped. But this is an associated dentition from, I think from E Creek, if memory serves, that we have many of the teeth. So we can plot them out. In terms of the tooth itself, we have a crown and a root. I would like to point out that what we call enamel in sharks does not share a common ancestor with the enamel in our teeth, which was a surprising thing that was found. It has a different embryonic origin, so when they're growing in the womb, so these two things independently evolved, the enamel in our teeth and the enamel in sharks. That's why sharks it's often called enameloid. The roots also don't function in the same way as the roots of our teeth, which we'll talk about. Common misconception is that the front of the tooth is actually the back of the tooth. So I'm going to hold up for in the room, and so if the shark is about to eat you will see the flat side of the tooth, the side without what is labeled burlette on the image. So you will see this. The curved side of the one, the convex side of the tooth, is the side that is facing the tongue. So we call that lingual. Labial is the other side towards lips. So that's what's going on there. In Megalodon, we have this chevron-shaped or triangle-shaped region on the lingual side called the borlette, also called a chevron, or sometimes an enamel band or a dental band. And we'll talk a little bit about what that probably was in a second. And then you have serrations along the side, so little bumps on the side, kind of like a knife. Compare this with the great white shark, which is something that it was compared with for a very long time. And those of you who are here can come up at some point and look at both of these things. You can see that great white sharks, Carcharodon carcharias, scientific name, has serrations that are much more irregular than in Megalodon generally. They do not have that chevron shape on the side. Sometimes I have a little sliver of something there, but it's curved usually. And then they also have a root shape that is very different from Megalodon. You can see it's kind of shaped like a rectangle almost, like a bar, not much of a notch in the bottom. Whereas Megalodon, if I go back to it, you can see it's kind of almost this very bilobate. We could say it has two lobes on the bottom. So those are some differences. And we now know, it is now generally accepted that the great white shark arose from a species that was common in the Miocene. You can find it in Maryland. Many of you probably have. Which was often called the broad-toothed mako, Carcharodon hastalis. And hastalis is basically identical in every way to a great white shark, except for the fact it doesn't have serrations. We now have very good deposits, particularly from Peru, but also in some other places, where we can literally see serrations developing from the base of the crown up to the tip. They've named that a new species, Carcharodon hubbleyi, after a famous shark tooth collector. Who had the specimen that is that they named the species off of. And so now we can see that there's not much ambiguity where great whites came from. In terms of the porlet, what it actually probably is an attachment for a ligament, for connective tissue. This is a bamboo shark on the right, and then on the left, we have a CT image of a great white shark sliced through. And you can see that there's two kind of layers. This is one layer that goes basically where the root contacts the crown. And that is basically like something that connects all of the teeth together. Sharks lose lots of teeth in their lifetime and moves forward like a conveyor belt. And this is kind of what's pulling them along, but it's also anchoring them to the jaw, to another layer of connective tissue that's more elastic. In this particular, in a bamboo shark, it's very useful because when they eat hard prey, that allows the teeth to bend back and be used like battering rams. Or when they're eating soft, it allows it to stay pointed upwards so it can puncture the prey. For great white sharks, that's probably less of a thing, and for Megalodon, that's probably less of a thing. Megalodon is a massive shark. Its bite pressure was potentially the largest bite pressure of any animal that has ever lived. Thus, it needed a lot of strong connective tissue to hold the teeth in place while functioning. That's probably why we have a porlet on it and not in many other sharks. Great whites are the only thing that kind of gets close to that level. And you can see that layer here. I don't know if this is showing. This is actually not showing up there, but that's okay. I think I can actually draw. Actually, there's a laser pointer. So this is what I'm referring to right here. So we also have some vertebra from Megalodon, several vertebral columns, vertebral centra, as we call them. Sharks are cartilaginous fish, as many of you probably know, but they're a vertebral column because a lot of muscles are attaching to it. It needs some amount of stiffness, and so they are partially mineralized. Many who fossil collect along the Tower Cliffs have probably found a few shark vertebra. There's generally recognized two kind of general types of shark vertebra, a quote-unquote lamnoid type, and a quote-unquote sceleorhinoid type. You don't need to remember that, but basically if it's smooth, it's the sceleorhinoid. And there's a bunch of sharks that have that, things like bull sharks and stuff. And then you have this quote unquote lamnoid. That's what Megalodon's going to be. It has lamina on the side, so it has very kind of like ribbony things. Those in this room can see a basking shark that kind of has that over there. It's kind of cool, but those names don't mean anything with the family. Like it's not all lamnoids have this, or all the people are still kind of figuring out how it's distributed across the family tree. You can section these, and someone has sectioned one of the Megalodon teeth, and you can look at the rings of its growth and then deduce possibly how old the shark was. And so this particular individual from Belgium, for which we have a very good column, probably died around 46 years old. They may have lived much longer, it seems. So they were a pretty long-lived shark. And it seems, given some of our regression equations, that at birth, they were probably around 6 feet long, which is quite large. This has led some to believe that, like great white sharks and some other sharks, they are in the womb of the shark, that they may have eaten each other. This is something that's common throughout sharks. And so they probably only gave birth to a few individuals at a time, which makes sense when the individual is 6 feet long. So now I'm going to talk about the history of study, because I think that it's something that we don't know, that people don't always talk about. And there's another talk that I've already done that's already on YouTube about a lot of the ancestors. So I'm going to speed through the ancestors when I get there, talk a little more about why we think what we think about sharks. The oldest people to study sharks seem to have been in the Neolithic. We've got a 5,000-year-old Neolithic house, which has a megalodon tooth, was found in it. So there's many shark teeth found in homes in this area in Oman that were probably used for projectile points, so for arrowheads. But this family happened to have picked up a megalodon. Who knows if they knew what it was, what it was for. But going forward, at around 73 CE or AD, we have Pliny the Elder, an Italian or a Roman philosopher, who first gave these a name, or at least first wrote down the name glossopetrae, which is tungstone, which is what fossil shark teeth were known as for 1,500 years in Europe. They were believed to be fossilized tongues or petrified tongues. He believed that they fell from the sky during lunar eclipses, and that they were from, I believe from humans. People later on, especially for smaller ones, believed them to be from snakes. Many were thought to be like saints had come and turned the snakes into stones, and this was the remnants of their teeth. Some thought they were the tips of lightning bolts, as with other fossils. This 1554 Andre Tevet, this is the first time we have someone drawing a megalodon and putting it in print that we have, and it's from Malta. And he notes that some fishermen said, hey, this kind of looks like a tooth from a shark, but he did not believe that. He was firm that it was from a giant snake, due to the fact that at the time in Europe, many people would file parts of these fossil teeth into their drink, rich people particularly, in order to neutralize poison, because they believed that it was not poison. And how could it do that if it was not from a snake? They logicked. This logic is not true, so don't try that. But in 1616, Fabio Colonna, also from Naples, same place as Pliny the Elder, gets a hold of some great white shark teeth and looks at them both and says, yeah, I'm pretty sure these two things are from the same type of animal. And a few people did some dissections later on and confirmed that this was indeed the case. So from 1616 onwards in Europe, we've got a pretty good idea of what we're talking about. In the Americas, we have a separate parallel intellectual tradition that is also studying the same things. We have evidence of them being used in the Mayan city-states. We have them in Panama, we have them in Colombia, and in Maryland. They're probably in many other places in the United States. It's not very well studied. In Maryland, we have evidence of them being used as pendants. We have them being used in terms of arrowheads. And in the Ohio River Valley, we get a lot of mound building cultures. The indigenous people there seem to use them a lot more in burial practices. And as it seems, the lithic, so the stone tools that are found in Ohio in these burial sites, are also often found in Maryland with shark teeth. So there seems to have been a trade going on between the two areas. What did they think about these shark teeth? How did they think about evolution? Did they know they were sharks? Questions that are not in the literature, but we could just ask them. As it turns out, indigenous people are alive and well in Maryland today. There are 4 groups on the eastern shore. I'm more interested at this moment in talking with some in the western shore. Right now, we're on Piscataway and Susquehannock land. These are people who were living and finding shark teeth for many thousands of years. So it'd be kind of cool to see what they think. So I do plan on asking some of the elders over there and seeing how they conceptualize sharks and shark evolution. Now, once we get to the Enlightenment, we get a little past Enlightenment, people come up with Linnaeus, Carolus Linnaeus comes up with binomial nomenclature, so naming things in the way that we do. And Louis Agassiz here describes the megalodon for the first time, but gives it the name megalodon as Carcharias megalodon. Carcharias is sand tiger shark. So he was a little bit off on that one. But he named a megalodon, and in a few years, about 10 years later, he gives it then the new name Carcharodon, at the same as the great white shark. Now he's writing this 30 years before Charles Darwin comes up with evolution by natural selection. So he doesn't, at this point, he doesn't even know that that's a possibility. He just says that these two teeth look similar. Thus, I will group them in the same way. He believed God created each species in parallel where it lived. Some of them went extinct. and said that we're going to classify them by how close they look to each other, not necessarily implying any relationship between them. In the 1860s, when Charles Darwin publishes this, along with Alfred Russel Wallace and other people, he is a staunch denier of evolution, remains so till the end of his life. He works at Harvard in the end of his life. He was well known for scientific racism. He pushed a lot of it out. He believed human races were different species that were created at different points in the globe, and that you could hierarchically rank them. So his name has been removed from a lot of colleges up in Harvard and a lot of things recently. But he is the guy who names Megalodon and puts it in Carcharodon for the first time. So at that point, I think it's nice now we can go through some of the relatives of Megalodon. We have some here. Many of you probably know what these are already, but we'll go through them. I'll speed through it. So this is Cretolamna, specifically appendiculata, sometimes spelled Cretolamna. This is a shark species which is common in the Cretaceous around the world. And survives the extinction that kills the dinosaurs around 65 million years ago, and persists into the Eocene. It's defined, we have one here, and I'll pass it around, by having it has a very flat root. There's not much curvature to it. And generally speaking, their cusps point a little more in the straight up. So cusps are the little bumps on the sides of this principal crown. And so you can see that they kind of point generally straight up. I'm going to pass this one around. This one, I believe, comes from Maryland. You can find it at First State Park for those of you who are looking for a place to find shark teeth. So that is kind of the first member of a lineage that may be close to Megalodon. Here's the dentition of Cretolamna. So this is not from Appendiculata, but from a different species in the Western Interior Seaway. The middle of the US used to be covered with an ocean. And you can see its jaw, part of its jaw, which is cartilaginous, but here preserved. And you can see its teeth. You can see it's got very flat, throughout the tooth row, very flat root. Then you have Ototus obliquus. Ototus means ear tooth. So someone looked at that root and thought, that looks like an ear. Or it was Louis Agassiz as well. So he came up with that. We have one here. I'll pass it around as well. This is Ototus obliquus. It generally has not a flat root, very, very more lobed root. And it's also the first member of this lineage which gets big. This thing gets up to 3.5, potentially some people have claimed up to like 4 inches. And so it's pretty big. Here's the dentition. It lives through the 60 million years ago up to 50-ish million years. Here's its dentition. And it's generally estimated to around 30 feet, probably got a little bit bigger than that in some cases. It's pretty common. You can find this in Maryland, First State Park. And then we get, in some places where we're lucky and we have very good time preservation, we can see the serrations developing on this tooth. And in Russia, where they're at the time, well, at one point, Kazakhstan was part of the Soviet Union, right? But writing just after this fall of the Soviet Union, some Russian scientists went down to these sites and went layer by layer, collected all the teeth and named each layer different species or subspecies, depending on the degree of serration. So we've got this one, Mogotsarchus, we've got Exuaticus, we've got Carcharocles auriculatus. Auriculatus is the fully serrate one. It's got very rough serrations. These are all sharks that are generally found in a period of time called the Eocene, around 50-ish million years ago. You can find this kind of in Maryland, in some places on the Potomac River, nowhere that you can't, that is really publicly accessible. You can get there via boat in some places along the Potomac River. We have an example here, it looks like. This one, I would call it, so Mogotsarchus is just cusps, is cusp serration, and maybe some wrinkles on the crown. Then you have partial serration up, that's Axuaticus. That's what they call it. These are names that are perhaps a little bit more specific than we would name these days. And then auriculatus is all the way up to the tip. This one I would probably call, it Axuaticus, but many would call it auriculatus. Some of these people, especially Russian scientists again, even cut up the Eocene into 2 different species. The early Eocene, they call auriculatus. The late Eocene, they call Sokolauvi. Sokolauvi has finer serrations along the blade. This is a tooth that's found in the Suwannee River in Florida. It's a tooth that's extremely common in a place in Morocco called Dakhla, which is where this particular tooth is from. We're starting to get up into the 4-inch range in terms of size for these teeth. And then we have angustidens. Angustidens, compassionately known by collectors as angies, are a tooth that is finely serrated from tip and also on the cusps. It is one which has somewhat reduced cusps in terms of like height, and they're kind of elongated. We have a few here that could be described as that. I don't know if this one is technically actually one, but it looks pretty similar to what we're going for here. This is very, very common in the low country of South Carolina. It's found in Australia. It's found occasionally in Virginia and a few other places. Here's an associated dentition from Australia. It's not many teeth, but it's enough that you can kind of get the idea of the mouth, what it looked like. In my opinion, a very pretty tooth. And then you got chubs, what they call chubs here in Maryland. These are teeth which have bumps, not really like cusps that are separated from the crown, but kind of bumps on the side. They call vestigial or reduced cusplets. This is actually a lot of what we find in Maryland. Here's an absolutely beautiful example of one right there. And this is happening in the Miocene. Here's a part of a dentition from Lee Creek. You can see that even within the mandible of one individual, you have cusps that are very different sizes. So you have ones here that are, you're like, okay, those are cusps. I can see that. Down here, I see nothing. So even there's a lot of variation within the individual, and certainly probably within the population. One of the beautiful things about Maryland is that we capture this perfectly, the time in which this is occurring. You can go to sites in the northern part of the Calvert Cliffs, places like Brownies Beach, and you can see mostly cusped teeth, mostly chubs. And then you go down to Matoaka, might find a few chubs, but you're largely finding things that are megalodon, so without cusps. You go further south to like Calvert Cliff State Park, you're not going to find chubs, really. You're going to find things without cusps. I've seen a few teeth that have cusps on one side, but not on the other. So this is clearly a population that is changing. Maybe not like two species that are splitting off. This is one species that's changing over time, right? And then megalodon goes extinct. Goes extinct around 3.5 million years ago, according to good deposits in California. And we should probably look at some other deposits throughout the world, I think, to get a better idea, because it might be that it goes extinct a little later in other places. We don't know why. People love to suggest that great whites, which are serrating at the same time, had something to do with it. It's potentially the case. There are some reasons to think that is not the case, considering the isotopes between the two aren't very different at this time. So who knows what's going on? The climate is not undergoing anything especially different, yeah.
You say the isotopes, you mean the higher trophic level?
The trophic level isotopes, the zinc isotopes. They do find that modern great whites are very different from fossil great whites. Now they have a small sample size of modern ones, but modern ones generally had a much higher trophic level than the fossil ones, strangely enough. Maybe due to the fact that like we're killing a lot of the smaller, like overfishing and killing of smaller marine mammals may have something to do with that. So that they're forced to go for higher level stuff. People argue that great whites maybe are starting to go for more pinnipeds at this time, more seals at this time, and that maybe juvenile megalodon also needed seals to survive. And thus they took out a life stage of megalodon, and so megalodon went extinct. There's no evidence to support that, but it could be the case. In terms of the climate, it is generally getting cooler. So maybe there was like a tipping point in which it wasn't good for megalodon, but as an endotherm, that is not a great explanation either. For whatever reason, it disappears from the geological record. So it goes extinct. We're very sure of that. So this is 60 million years of evolution that we're looking at here. We see an increase in size, followed by serration, starting at the cusps and going up the blade. And then we see a further increase in size, fining up of those serrations, and a reduction of the cusps. The reasons for all of this: conjecture. We have lots of ideas, not much proof. But this is what is occurring evolutionarily. And there's not, other than these first two species, the Cretalamina and Ototus, we don't have much evidence of like two different species living at the same time. There's like one type that exists throughout the world's ocean all at one time. So this is probably a continuous population, generally. Although there are some new analyses that are looking into the shape of some megalodon. There may be a difference between Atlantic megalodon and Pacific megalodon, but more on that in the future, hopefully. Phylogeny is something that we're going to have to go over to explain why all the names are weird, why you've probably seen many different names for megalodon: Carcarcles megalodon, Ototus megalodon, Megasalacious, Procarcharodon, lots of names. So we're going to learn a little bit about evolutionary biology. This is a way of thinking that started more or less, I mean, Darwin created a phylogenetic tree in his book. It's his only figure in his book. But that way of thinking that that was not very ancestor descendant to think of things more in a tree is more started around the 70s and really took hold in the 2000s. So the idea behind it is that life has a single origin, as far as we can tell. Every species thus shares a common ancestor with every other species on this planet. Species with more recent common ancestors must be more closely related, and we hope that species that are more closely related and share a closer common ancestor share more traits with each other than ones that are more distantly related. This is not always the case, but we hope it to be the case. And with molecular analysis, we now have a lot of data with which to test that in terms of like, if you have a whole string of, TAGC, those are the bases of your DNA. That's a lot of things that it would be hard for two things to evolve in the exact same way, the exact same genetic code for a very long genetic code. So that's been very helpful in creating phylogenies that we're pretty sure are close to correct. And that's how we generate them. So reading this phylogeny, I've studied primates, so I've given you a phylogeny of apes. There we are, there, humans. So at this node right here, so these nodes are the points in which they come together, common ancestors. So who can tell me what is most closely related to humans based on this phylogeny? Someone in the room? Yeah? Yeah.
Chimps and bonobos.
Yeah, chimps and bonobos. People always think chimps, but bonobos are equally related to us. How about this? Is a gorilla more closely related to a human or an orangutan? More to a human than an orangutan. This is because its common ancestor, you can see, is between the gorilla and the humans is closer than the common ancestor between the gorillas and the orangutan. These nodes, you can switch them around. They're kind of, you can think of them as swivel points. It's still the same tree. It's just relationships, right? And we can, using some methods, many of which include molecular data, but not all of which, we can kind of get an idea of when these common ancestors existed. So we're fairly sure like humans and chimp bonobo, the human chimp bonobo common ancestor was probably like 6 to 10 million years ago. So that's how you read phylogenies. This comes with it several terms. I know they're scary, but it'll be okay, I promise. A monophyle is a good thing. That's also known as a clade or a natural group. This is something that is defined, like it is a genuine biological grouping of organisms. It is not something that scientists, I mean, we do make it up in some sense, but it's not arbitrary. A monophyle or a clade is something which has a common ancestor and all of its descendants. All of its descendants. That's what we want when we name something. Whether it be a species, a genus, a family, that's what we want. Back in the day, before they really thought of evolution in this way, we created a lot of what they called grades, what we now call paraphyletic lineages. These include a common ancestor, but not all of its descendants. So, for example, a tarsier. So is a tarsier here more closely related to a human or to a lemur? Yeah, it's a weird way to think about life, but it's actually it is the technically right way to think about life in some ways. So tarsiers are more closely related to humans than they are to lemurs. But in the old days, we grouped lemurs and tarsiers into a group prosimians, pre-monkey, because they split off before what we think of as monkeys. There was a little bit of a snafu in that we just didn't know that this tree was built in this way. But that doesn't make any sense. We don't want things that are not closely related to each other to be in the same group. You can define a group right here, and in fact there is, it's called haplorhines, that includes tarsiers and monkeys and apes and humans. That is good. That is what we want. Grades have some uses, but they're not used very much anymore. Polyphiles, bad, always been bad. It's what we've never ever wanted, which is something, we have descendants of a common ancestor, which is everything on this planet, but you don't include its ancestor, its common ancestor. So like if I had an animal right here, which is actually the first primate, right? Or the first crown primate, that's the same. But anyway, that creature would not be in the same group as lorises and tarsiers if you're going by this red box here. That's bad. That happens when you have two things that look very similar because they live in a similar lifestyle. So they have independently evolved traits that are similar. This is much rarer to happen with like genetics, but pretty common in traits, especially in sharks, right? Because all we have are teeth, and teeth generally have one function in sharks, which is eating. Thus, if two things are eating the same thing, even if they're not closely related, they're probably going to develop somewhat similar traits in their teeth. So this is called convergence, when two things have similar things because of their lifestyle. Problem with this framework, if you think on it for a while, is like, wait a minute, what if I find a fossil and it's not branched off? What if I've actually found its ancestor? So I'm looking at this phylogeny, like if I found a fossil that is here, so there's an unbroken line between here and humans, right? Between the first primates and humans. What if I find a direct ancestor to humans? What am I gonna do? How will I know? We don't, generally. So that's why we generally just assume that we don't have it. But this may be a poor way of thinking when we have a really high resolution look at evolution. It happens in sharks. Happens to some extent in fossil humans. We actually have a very good record of fossil humans, comparatively speaking. So we've developed some methods that try to do this based on like saying like, okay, we can kind of estimate what all the characters should be, like what we should see trait-wise in an ancestor. And if something is close enough to it, we just stick it on the stem. We just stick it to it. So like in this one, you can see Homo antecessor was close enough, they thought, to Homo sapiens and Homo, and so modern human and Neanderthal traits that we should just say it's an ancestor. There's a lot of assumptions that go into this. So this is a dangerous game to play, but it's something that we kind of need to do sometimes. I won't say that I agree with this phylogeny, but these are all hypotheses about how things are related. There is a true tree of life, but we can only make a guess. So I tell you this so you can understand why we name things the way we do. So Carcharodon, originally Agassiz just puts them in two groups, does not think about how they're related. No one really explicitly ever says it, but as we start to think more evolutionarily, we start to, the idea that Megalodon gave rise to the great white shark begins to occur. By the 80s and then into the 90s, there's some very big supporters of this, people like Applegate, Purdy, and Gottfried, not to be confused with Godfrey, both of which were curators of the Calvert Marine Museum. But they had the idea that they put it in a more phylogenetic perspective, like I was just saying, like in a tree of life, but still with the closest, the great white being closely related to Megalodon. Purdy said Paleocarcharodon starts this lineage, which most people now believe is related to Ototus, but is not related to great whites at all. So in the 20s, someone comes up with the name Carcharocles. He says, I don't think that this is close enough to great whites where we can say like they're the same genus. I don't know how he was thinking about it, if he was thinking of it evolutionarily or not, because he doesn't say. I just read the paper. He just says, here's two species, Carcharodon auriculatus and Carcharocles auriculatus and Carcharocles rectus, which is just Megalodon. So I guess, I don't know why he didn't think Megalodon was a good term for it, but he didn't. Someone comes along in the 60s, he actually writes this in a paper I cannot find, written in the Congo, by colonial officials, saying that, you know what, I think that great white is descended from the mako that we find, the broad-toothed mako, correctly. this person notes that. Also correctly notes that there's a lineage of megatoothed sharks and decides to call them Procarcharodon, which is unfortunate because that just means before great white shark, which is not really what he's implying, but that's what he tries. A Russian comes along in the 60s and says, I think that it notes that the relationship between the megatoothed sharks and Ototus. Says, okay, I can see the roots are the same on these things. This is a lineage. And so he calls them all Ototus up to, he thought that the loss of cusps was very important. So he named that a new thing, Megasalacious, for Megasalacious megalodon. And also didn't recognize that Chabutensis was a different species. So it's just Megasalacious megalodon. Guy comes along in the 90s, says, you know what? This serration stuff, this cusp stuff, none of it matters. It's all Ototus. So it's just Ototus megalodon. So Team Ototus is what's winning right now. The reason is because now people put it in a phylogenetic context. There's several species of Ototus. These are two different ideas. And they're probably related like this, is what people think. Now, we know that Obliquus is probably most closely related to Megalodon. We know there's another species called Parototus. We have one here. We're not sure where it sits, but these are two different ideas. The ways you can fix this to make it monophyletic, to make it so you have a real group. So this is where Ototus should start. This is the common ancestor of all Ototus. You could turn Carcharocles and Parototus into Ototus on this one. So there would be no Parototus. There would be no Carcharocles. It is all Ototus. Or on this one, just turn Carcharocles into Ototus and everything's fine. This is what people embrace. Alternatively, you could give every different species of Ototus a different genus name. Now, Ototus minor looks exactly the same as Ototus obliquus, except it is small. So people are not comfortable with doing that. Also, these trees are completely made up. There is no analysis that has produced these trees. Fossil shark people have not, as far as I know, there's like maybe one phylogenetic analysis that has ever been done on a fossil shark. So all of this is in our heads. We can't test this. So this brings us to issues. We have a resolution that is way too high. We have so many fossil shark teeth from every single time period, beautifully represented. We don't have a framework which combines microevolution and macroevolution. So like alleles shifting in a population, like traits being different in a population, and species being created. And we have an especially terrible framework for understanding ancestor-descendant evolution. We also have an issue where we find a fossil shark tooth, and I want to do like a big fancy analysis. They're similar enough to each other where it's like it's hard to tell which tooth I'm looking at, but they're different enough where you got to know which tooth you're looking at. We also have an issue that not many people study sharks in general in terms of genetics. We don't know really how a lot of sharks are related very confidently to each other. We know some of them, and we have some ideas, mostly based on mitochondrial DNA, not nuclear DNA. And there's some issues that I won't explain, but that make it hard with phylogenies, but can be resolved with time and effort. Fossil shark phylogeny just doesn't exist, really. So this creates a very big problem for understanding the evolution of sharks in general. Because convergence is rampant and because teeth don't have many characters on them, you can say this is serrated or this is this shaped, but if you have a whole body, you can say lots of things about an organism. Not so with teeth, which is the only thing that preserves from sharks other than vertebrae. Heterodonty, I pointed out before, is variable between species. So some species, a lot of their teeth look the same. Some look a lot different. So recently, people have used a method called shape analysis, which quantifies shape in a very cool way. This has been done for a long time in mammals and in other organisms, but not in sharks. And someone's looking at heterodonty specifically in tiger sharks, and then over the course of their life, how their teeth change in shape. And they've done it only in 2D. On monkey fossils, I use something called Auto 3D GM, which automatically places points across the entire tooth. No one puts them there. They're automatically generated and automatically aligns all the teeth and does this analysis of shape, which also takes away size, which is confusing. Maybe if people are interested, can ask me about it. And this does it automatically. And it shows different clusters. These are different genuses, but I didn't color them. Also in mammals, but no one's tried it with sharks, you can treat teeth like maps, like they are mountains. And you can characterize their complexity, and you can characterize their sharpness and their relief. This is probably related to their diet. Things that are very complex in mammals eat more vegetation. No sharks are eating vegetation. Things that are very not complex are probably eating things like shells or durophagus. Things that are very complex are probably eating more meat. Sharpness has to do with the shape of the thing. So these are functionally important variables that you can characterize using this method, which I've done here for Megalodon. And it just spits out a number. If you get a good phylogeny, if we can manage this, then we can say at what point evolution started selecting for things that are what we think is very important to Megalodon, like size, shape, complexity. What are the things that are important for making Megalodon what it is, and why is it this way? We have methods for that just haven't been used for sharks. And I can combine it all together. I'm working on this in primates, and I can map the complexity of the tooth onto the shape of the tooth. And now I can see that these two clusters, I'll put it on here so people can see, two clusters here, while they're different in shape, they have the same complexity. Over here, these two clusters are different in shape, but the same complexity. So these are things that we can start seeing, okay, evolution's looking for complexity, but it's starting from different shapes because it's starting from different ancestors, but it's going towards the same thing. And I think that's pretty cool. You can also see, no one wants a flat tooth, right? That's a very low complexity. So these are things that we can learn, and we can, with phylogeny and modeling methods, we can really tease some of that stuff out. So that's what I'm working on. And I've talked longer than I meant to. But anyone have any questions? Yeah.
Here's one that's been driving me crazy. They say that Credo Lambda is
The first.
Ancestor of Ototus.
Yeah.
So when they changed that whole lineage up to Megalodon from Ototus obliquus, why did they call it Credo Lambda?
That's a great question. Okay, Carcarcles by itself, which is all the megatooth sharks, is a perfectly beautiful monophyletic group on its own. It's not the issue. Ototus is the issue because of the fact that it's nested inside of it. Cretolambda is potentially, we don't know because no one's done the phylogenetic analysis, but the idea is that it's nested inside Cretolambda. Yes, you have the same issue. So do I want to make all of it Cretolambda? No, that would be kind of outrageous, I think. To put a Megalodon and something like this together feels like a lot. Maybe that is the right way to do it. I don't know, but that feels like a lot to me.
Yeah. You have 50, 60 billion years to do it.
Exactly. Humans or tetrapods, we are nested inside of fish, right? But you wouldn't call us fish.
What? The picture.
I don't know what the solution to the issue is. I think if we did the phylogenetic analysis, we find this is not exactly the case. That they actually, there was a cladogenic event there, especially because Cretolambda lives at the same time as Ototus. So it can't be its ancestor. They had a common ancestor, and they both lived at the same time. So Cretolambda is easier to solve, probably. Ototus and Carcarcles, I don't know what to do about that.
Takes a while sometimes.
That's the problem that we have.
I just didn't want to have to change all my labels.
Yeah. Don't. And that's what I say. Names are made up by people.
Yep.
So as long as you know, if we all know what we're talking about, we're all good. We're all good.
Abstract boxes.
Yes, they're abstract bosses. Now, natural groupings are real groupings, but they're hard to make in a consistent manner. Okay. That's why some people just have abandoned using names in general. We just talk about nodes. We talk about common ancestors. And we name those nodes, and that's what we talk about. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat. Did all Megalodon give birth to live young?
Well, okay, so because of the size,
What do you want to drink?
thought that they did.
said-
Great whites. So they had an egg, but it hatches in the womb. I mean, we have an egg that hatches in the womb, but they had an egg that hatches in the womb. They potentially ate each other in utero, and then a few would come out. So yes, Megalodon probably assuming that is closely related, that this whole lineage is closely related to the lineage that gives rise to great whites, what we would expect is that all of them would have live birth. Yeah. We don't know that for sure, but we think that.
Another question in the chat.
Yeah.
Is there anything curious about a single species of shark living from the Cretaceous to the Eocene? Seems like a long time.
Yeah, 20 million years is certainly a long time for a single species to live. Species live, because we have a difficult time defining a species, having a typical length for which a species should live is also difficult. We're also only looking at their teeth. We don't know what's happening in their bodies and their genomes, which are probably changing a lot. I think that the only thing we can diagnose in the fossil record is what we see, which is the teeth and the vertebra. So if we don't see a change, then we really have no other choice but to call it all the same species. There are people who would split it that into different things based on very subtle differences between the Eocene ones and the Cretaceous ones. You can decide for yourself whether you think those are legitimate. Yeah. So yeah, it is strange, but it's what happens.
Another question, what did Megalodon eat near the shore or in shallows?
I would point out that dolphins live pretty close to shore, so they'd probably be eating dolphins and whales. And whales were actually generally smaller in the Miocene than they are today, or rather, the largest whales that exist today did not exist in the Miocene, as far as we know. They come up in the Pliocene. So it was eating those. It was probably eating seals. It was probably eating whales. I'm sure it ate fish. I'm sure it ate sea cows. Anything it could eat, but it was a large creature, so it probably had to mostly eat whales. Yeah. I will say also on the question before that sharks, because all the oceans are connected, speciation isn't as strong in the oceans generally for things that can swim between continents. So that also makes species live longer, probably. So that's a question that can be investigated with DNA.
How much data exists behind the trivia that 1 inch of neck tooth correlates with 10 feet of body size?
I would say that is, so the new methods that are to create the size of the megalodon are based on the vertebral column and not actually the height of the tooth, but the width of the tooth, which helps estimate the size of the mouth in general. That said, it's a good rule of thumb. If you want something to just tell somebody, hey, this is probably this sized shark, yeah, why not? I mean, we do not really know how big these animals were. The vertebral column is like 30-ish feet long, and the head probably added a little bit to that, but that's what we're going on. It didn't have any teeth with it, so that didn't really help. Yeah, sharks. All right then. Well, thank all y'all for coming out. Hope you enjoyed.
Excuse me.
Oh, yes.
Just one question.
Of course.
How can you tell the difference between how big the megalodon was and how big the mosasaurus was? Like, do you have to compare their teeth?
Yes, that's a great question. So we're lucky. For Mosasaurus, we have the whole skeleton. So we can say how long Mosasaurus is. For the shark, we have to guess based on living sharks because their bones are made of cartilage, which doesn't preserve very long. So we can guess based on their teeth that they were probably, in many cases, larger than Mosasaurus. Yeah.
Thanks.
Anytime.
That was the greatest lesson of my life because maybe I can visit the mosasaurus one day.
I'm like a little kid.
Yeah, you should do that.
Oh.
No, it'd be really cool. Yeah,
I'm absolutely gonna go there one day.
that's awesome. That's awesome.
It's in the car. Cool.
All right.
So that picture you sent,
What else good?
the Calvert
Oh, we
Cliffs
got
is
one
the only
more.
place we're allowed to,
With all this movement of
but
nature,
they have
how
scientists,
many sharks do you think there were?
like, I think there's special places for
There
other.
were more, well,
Science.
yes, something I didn't mention. People have something that does preserve for sharks is their dermal denticles. Sharks have things that are kind of like teeth on the sides of their body, which preserve. We can take cores of the ocean and count the types. People have done this, and they have found that during the beginning of the Miocene, there was a massive crash in shark species, a shark apocalypse, people say. We do not see this in the teeth. In the teeth, the Miocene is the best time to be a shark. We've got like a bunch of shark species, a bunch of large shark species. How many sharks were there during the Miocene? Probably more than there are today. It was warmer. There was more whales, probably no humans to kill all the whales. So more, I would guess, but hard to say because there seems to be an incongruence in two lines of evidence. Yeah.
But, I mean, do you think there was 25 different species of sharks in the Miocene?
Oh, well, I mean, today there are thousands of species of sharks, right?
Right.
So there were thousands of species of sharks in the Miocene. Another problem with the fossil record is we don't get deep water very often. We're missing so many sharks, and a lot of sharks today, their teeth look almost identical. Like especially a lot of the Carcharinus species, and we find buckets of those at the cliffs, right? But we've categorized those into what we think are like 7 species, but there's almost certainly dozens of species that we're not that would be apparent if we were living at the time, that we would probably name if we were living at the time. Yeah, so thousands, more than today, probably.
Rachel has a question.
Oh, hey, Rachel. Or hello.
Hi, this is Sebastian. Sebastian, you have a question?
Hi, Sebastian.
What did the megalodon's tail look like?
That is actually an incredible question. You know what? I've got a slide for this. So we have different guesses. One of them is based on great white sharks. So we think that like if we take great white sharks and mako sharks and we like average their tail and then scale it up, that's the top image. So that's the guess here. And it's also this image, this part right here with the X. Or we can go with, there's a very complicated way of figuring out things about sharks based on how they change when they get bigger. And using this, some people have said that their tail probably looked like, and their body probably looked like more like a lemon shark. So that's more like this tail down here. So that's how we figured it out, but we don't have any fossils, so we can't be sure. But we're making educated guesses. So we're taking the evidence we have and we're making the best guess we can. That's a great question.
Thank you.
Anytime, anytime.
Someone else in the chat asked, when was the shark apocalypse?
Shark apocalypse was, if it happened, was in the early Miocene. So like 15-ish million years ago. Yeah, right after the Oligocene transition. We do see like differences in some species from the Oligocene to the Miocene, but like in the early Miocene, so that's the Calvert Formation. The Calvert Formation is supposed to be during the shark apocalypse. So Brownie's Beach. It looks fine to me, but that's just one place on the planet. And I should also note they only said that for pelagic sharks. So sharks that are traversing oceans and living in the open ocean, which we don't have a good tooth record for in general. So that might be why we're missing it. Or we have an issue with the way that we're counting scales. It's probably, I think, more likely the problem. We know that different types of sharks can have different types of denticles on them, but to this degree, it's a very big thing to explain away as a statistical artifact. So wait and see. Awesome.
Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you guys. Yeah. All right. I have other things. This is the Japanese megalodon, by the way. This is a Japanese associated meg. With some denticles that we know are megalodon. Here's a Canadian meg. Who cares about that? This is how things are related to each other. If someone had asked that question. There you are.
Oh, we have another question.
Oh, okay. One more.
Rachel.
Oh,
Sorry.
Sorry.
yes.
Hi, this is Gwen. You want to ask your question?
Did megalodons eat birds that would go near the water?
That's a great question. That is a great question. That probably, so using, I will go back and I will use this slide. This slide, so using these scales, people have guessed, and also using the models that we create of how big we think they are and how wide we think they are, we have come up with their speed. They were fast. They were probably, the newest one says that they were probably pretty slow, except when they tried to attack something. Today, great white sharks will jump up and eat birds. Today, basking sharks, which eat plankton, will jump for fun, it seems. So it's not impossible that megalodon jumped out of the water. They're not that different from basking shark in terms of size. So yeah, that's possible. And that would be really scary, I think. But also really cool.
Thanks.
Right.
Thank you.
Those are all dermal denticles.
Yes.
What's the real life size?
Their real life size is similar to most other shark denticles. I think it has on there, I think this is probably a millimeter scale. The way that they tell the speed is the distance between the keels. There's different keels on some of them. And that distance has a relationship with the speed, their average speed. But they are not like massive. So I guess that's not, for whatever they're doing aerodynamically, they don't need to scale with body size.
Do thermal tentacles get replaced?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think they must, but I don't know for sure. Yeah, they probably do. Because that's probably the dermal denticles and teeth share a common ancestor. And shark teeth also share a common ancestor. So probably. Yeah, there's a paper that came out in Nature. So there's a big paper that came out recently that showed that teeth probably started out like the first thing to have teeth as a sensory organ. And they probably came from the skin into the mouth. So yeah. That's kind of cool. I see you got a shark tooth there. You got a megalodon. That's awesome.
In regards to teeth, how do we estimate bite force?
So we estimate based on, usually we've estimated currently based on great white sharks. Some people like to create how big we think the muscles would be based on the models, but we're making a lot of guesses. People have just done this analysis on all of the megatooth sharks that looks at the 2D shape and seeing what can it withstand. They're really trying to answer the question, why are cusps going away? And they thought one of the ideas is that cusps are not good if you're eating putting massive amount of force on a tooth, that they're fracture points. Because we find megs all the time that are snapped there. That's not the case, as it turns out. Megalodon is worse under pressure than its ancestors. So it's probably just the shark is getting big, and these changes, the cusp going away, is probably just the tooth getting so big that it swallows up the cusp. So this in this analysis, they estimated a lot of pressure on it. I think if my memory serves, none of them would have snapped the tooth. So a lot of pressure would have needed to snap the tooth, thus the bite force must have been incredible. It definitely snapped bones. It definitely was enough to drive a tooth into a whale vertebra. So a lot. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people, the way they've done it in the past, when you hear Megalodon had the largest bite force of all time, that's them just scaling a great white jaw up to that size and multiplying it by the amount. So I don't know if that's accurate, but it's what has been done. All right. I don't know how to end
No
it.
other questions in the chat, so thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you very much.